Some stories don't begin with gunfire or flashing lights. They begin with whispers, in towns where fences are high and family secrets are higher. Tonight, we're uncovering a mystery that shook the quiet heart of Liberty County, Texas. A story of a mansion, a pond, and a 911 call that still haunts investigators. Before we begin, remember, this is an ongoing investigation. All details come from verified public reports, and everyone mentioned is presumed innocent unless proven guilty. This video reports on an active investigation. Facts are drawn from official statements and media reports. Allegations remain unproven. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button if you haven't, so you follow us to the end of this matter. Stay with me. Now, let's step inside Rancho Monte Carlo. Just after sunrise on September 29, 2025, Liberty County's sheriff dispatchers answered a call that sent chills down their spines. A man's voice, trembling and urgent, cut through the early morning calm. Something was happening at his home, something life or death. That man was 61-year-old Domingo Quintana, owner of a sprawling gated property known as Rancho Monte Carlo. From the outside, the estate looked like success made solid: rolling green acres, tall iron gates, a pond glimmering behind a stone driveway. But what deputies would find behind those gates wasn't luxury. It was panic. When the first patrol car skidded to a stop, deputies jumped out to a scene of chaos. 3 children, ages 6, 11, and 15, stood drenched and trembling, their pajamas clinging to them. Nearby, Quintana himself was soaked to the bone, shouting for help. And floating face down in the pond was a woman, his wife. Without hesitation, deputies rushed into the water. They dragged her to shore and began CPR as paramedics raced down the dirt drive. The children watched silently, shivering in shock. The mother and 1 child were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The other 2, though physically stable, were terrified and speechless. In those first few minutes, Quintana looked like the desperate hero, a father who dove into the water to save his family. He told deputies his wife had drugged the children with NyQuil, then led them toward the pond, intending to end her life and theirs. Liberty County Sheriff's Captain David Myers later told reporters, "It's our belief the father pulled some of the kids out of the water. The kids were wet, the dad was wet, and the mother was still in the pond when deputies arrived." But investigators weren't ready to close the book. They examined footprints in the mud, searched the kitchen, took samples from the pond. Why would a mother of 3 suddenly do something like this? Was this truly a mental health crisis? Or had something been building long before that morning? Behind the scenes, detectives began looking into both parents, their finances, their marriage, their home life. The mansion that once symbolized wealth was now sealed off with crime scene tape. By midday, news spread across Liberty County like wildfire. Neighbors peeked from behind their gates, stunned that something so dark could happen in their quiet community. Rancho Monte Carlo, once a name that meant luxury, now meant tragedy. Reporters swarmed the area, and soon every major Houston outlet had the headline: "Mother and 3 children pulled from pond. Father called 911. Within hours, rumors began to ripple. Talk of stress, money, arguments, but authorities refused to speculate. Instead, they waited on toxicology results, trying to confirm whether NyQuil or any drug was involved. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services stepped in. The 3 children were taken into state custody for safety, while investigators pieced together what really happened inside that mansion before dawn. As one detective quietly told a reporter off-camera, "Something about this doesn't add up." That night, the story took a darker turn. Just as the community began to think they understood what happened, a new revelation surfaced. One that no one saw coming: a separate arrest, a hidden charge, and a local police officer suddenly suspended for his connection to the case. Whatever happened at Rancho Monte Carlo, the narrator says softly, wasn't over. It was only the beginning. When the sun rose the next morning, Rancho Monte Carlo was no longer a mansion, it was evidence. Detectives walked its hallways with cameras and latex gloves, piecing together the final hours before that 911 call. Every drawer was photographed, every medicine bottle cataloged. And somewhere between the footprints on the tile and the wet pajamas on the floor, investigators began to realize the story they'd been told didn't quite fit. Inside Liberty County Sheriff's Office, a new team took charge. What started as a near-drowning rescue had now become a full-scale investigation involving CPS, Texas Rangers, and the district attorney's office. Detectives interviewed the children, social workers observed them, and toxicology samples were rushed to the state lab in Austin. Results were pending, but one thing was clear: there were inconsistencies. Neighbors told deputies they hadn't heard screams or splashing that morning, only sirens later. Security cameras from nearby ranch roads showed movement hours before the 911 call. Lights flickering, a vehicle repositioning. Something, investigators believed, had unfolded long before dawn. Then came a twist no one predicted. Just days after the pond rescue, Domingo Quintana, the frantic father from the 911 call, was suddenly booked into jail. Not for violence, not for attempted homicide, but for animal cruelty. According to the sheriff's report, deputies discovered an emaciated cat locked inside a small cage on the property while executing a welfare check. The animal was barely alive. Quintana was arrested, photographed, and charged with a misdemeanor count of animal cruelty. It was a strange footnote in a tragic story, until prosecutors hinted that the discovery had given investigators reason to look closer at what life inside Rancho Monte Carlo had really been like. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services filed for temporary conservatorship of the children. In court, the agency said the kids needed stability and protection while authorities completed their findings. A judge agreed. For the first time, the Quintana mansion stood silent. No children's laughter, no family cars in the drive, only the yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the wind. Behind closed doors, deputies continued to review body cam footage and statements. One investigator told a Houston reporter off the record, "Sometimes the rescue isn't the end of the story. It's where it starts to get complicated." Then came another revelation that sent shockwaves through the small community. A Liberty Police lieutenant, identified in official statements as Ramiro Lozano, was placed on administrative suspension after reportedly visiting Quintana while he was in custody. The visit, unsanctioned and off-duty, raised immediate red flags. Internal Affairs opened an inquiry. Within hours, the Texas Rangers were notified. What was the connection between a local officer and a man at the center of a child endangerment investigation? No one would say publicly. Liberty's police chief released a short statement. "We hold our officers to the highest standards. Any potential misconduct will be thoroughly investigated." Reporters pressed for answers, but officials stayed silent. It was clear the story had spilled beyond one family. It was now reaching into the department itself. As the weeks passed, threads began to emerge. Financial documents suggested stress. Phone records revealed late-night calls, and interviews with family acquaintances hinted at a household strained by control and secrecy. To the public, it looked like chaos. To investigators, it looked like a pattern, one where image mattered more than peace, and silence was currency. A source close to the case told the Chronicle, "Everyone keeps asking if the mother snapped, but the deeper question is, what was she living with before she did?" By the second week of October, the mansion was still sealed off. The pond had been drained, forensic divers collecting residue from its bottom. No homicide charges had been filed yet, but detectives weren't closing anything. What they'd found beneath the surface, literally and figuratively, convinced them this was more than a domestic tragedy. There were signs of fear, of control, of a family dynamic that had been breaking long before the water turned dark. On paper, one investigator said, it was a rescue, but every time we look deeper, the timeline bends. As the sun set behind Liberty County's pine trees, Reporters packed up for the day, but detectives stayed behind. Inside a dimly lit office, the lead investigator pinned a single photo to the board, a family portrait taken months earlier. Everyone smiling, everyone perfect, except now half those smiles belong to victims, the rest to suspects. "Something's still missing," the investigator murmured. "And it's not just evidence, it's the truth." The gates of Rancho Monte Carlo had always stayed closed, polished metal and high walls shielding the world from what lay inside. To Liberty County deputies, it was just another patch of Texas wealth, until that morning when flashing lights turned the mansion's reflection in the pond into something darker. But as investigators combed through the sprawling estate, what they began to uncover would raise more questions than answers, and point to a truth far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Inside the mansion, the story Domingo Quintana told deputies began to unravel, piece by piece. The first sign came from the surveillance system, a full suite of cameras covering almost every inch of the property, except one. The pond area, where the alleged drowning attempt took place, had no active footage that morning. The feed had been disabled hours before deputies arrived. Detectives found that strange, because just days earlier, Quintana had upgraded the system himself. When asked why the footage was missing, he claimed the power went out during a storm. But the weather that night? Clear skies. Not a single report of power failure. That wasn't all. A search warrant revealed that the couple had been in the middle of a financial dispute. Bank records showed wire transfers to multiple offshore accounts, money that seemed to have vanished just before the incident. Investigators began to wonder if this was truly an attempted murder-suicide, or the cover for something else entirely. Then came the children's statements. The 15-year-old, still shaken, told investigators that the night before the incident, his parents had been arguing in the study, loud enough for the children to hear through the marble walls. He remembered one phrase clearly: "If they find out, it's over for both of us." That sentence, scribbled later in an officer's notes, became the line that haunted the case. What exactly were they afraid would be found? When forensic teams returned to the pond area, they discovered subtle but telling evidence. Drag marks in the mud suggested more than one person had entered and exited the water, but the patterns didn't match the chaotic story Quintana told. There were also traces of sedatives stronger than NyQuil found in the children's systems, prescription drugs that only someone with access or resources could obtain. At this point, investigators shifted gears. They weren't just looking at a domestic tragedy, they were probing into a possible staged crime. Behind closed doors, the sheriff's department began to work quietly with the Texas Rangers. What they uncovered next would push the story from a private family crisis into something that looked eerily orchestrated. Financial investigators traced one of Quintana's missing accounts to a shell company in Belize. From there, the paper trail linked to a contractor who had done security upgrades at Rancho Monte Carlo, including the installation of the very cameras that conveniently failed. That same contractor? He was already under investigation for wire fraud. Suddenly, Quintana's story didn't seem to fit the profile of a panicked father. It began to resemble the framework of someone hiding a much larger operation, maybe even laundering money through real estate and luxury assets. Still, there was no conclusive proof. The wife, who remained hospitalized, couldn't be interviewed. The children were placed in protective custody. Quintana, while cooperative, hired one of Houston's most expensive defense attorneys within 24 hours. But one piece of evidence still lingered: a phone found submerged near the pond. Forensic specialists managed to extract fragments of data. Among them, a deleted video clip. The footage was shaky, filmed at dawn, and lasted less than 10 seconds. It showed the reflection of flashing blue lights on water, and a voice whispering, "They'll never believe me." Who said it? The mother moments before she went under? Or Quintana, realizing the story was collapsing? Investigators couldn't tell. The clip wasn't enough to charge him, but it changed everything. From that moment, Rancho Monte Carlo was no longer just a scene of chaos. It became a symbol of the secrets people bury when the walls close in. And as deputies began piecing together a timeline that didn't match Quintana's emergency call, one chilling realization started to surface. Maybe this wasn't about saving lives. Maybe it was about silencing someone who knew too much. It had been 3 weeks since the tragedy at Rancho Monte Carlo, and the ripples were still spreading through Liberty County like a shadow. The estate had gone silent again. Gates locked, windows shuttered. The once bustling mansion now guarded by police tape and questions no one could yet answer. But behind closed doors, investigators were chasing a new lead. One that would blow open everything they thought they knew about the Quintana case. It began quietly. A forensic specialist from the Texas Rangers Digital Unit reached out to Detective Laura Hines, who'd been reviewing the pond video footage. Something about the phone they'd recovered didn't sit right. It wasn't the wife's. It wasn't registered under Domingo Quintana either. The number was linked to a prepaid device purchased 2 days before the incident under a fake name. And when the Rangers decrypted the phone's remaining data, what they found sent a chill through the room. There were 2 text messages, both timestamped at 4:12 a.m., less than an hour before Quintana's frantic 911 call. The first read, "She's starting to talk. I can't stop her this time." The second, "Do it before sunrise." The number it was sent to, still untraceable. But that single text turned the entire narrative on its head. If the message came from Quintana, then his claim that his wife had lost control began to crumble. And if it didn't, someone else was pulling strings from the shadows. As investigators dug deeper, new layers of deception began to surface. It turned out that the family's financial trouble ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Documents found in a safe inside Quintana's private study, hidden behind a false wall, revealed forged property deeds, offshore account numbers, and even a second passport in his name under an alias, Miguel Del Rio. He wasn't just a wealthy landowner. He was a man living 2 lives. But there was one more discovery that made detectives stop in their tracks. Inside the same safe was a small waterproof drive. When tech analysts cracked it open, they found encrypted files labeled simply Monte C. Once decoded, the drive revealed a series of recorded audio files, secret conversations between Quintana and an unknown woman. One clip, dated just a week before the incident, contained the wife's voice, trembling but defiant. "I'm done lying for you, Domingo. If they find out what you did to those girls, it's over." Detective Hines played that clip over and over again, the words echoing through the quiet evidence room. Those girls. It wasn't clear who she was referring to, their daughters or someone else entirely. But investigators now suspected that the incident at the pond wasn't an act of despair. It was an act of silence. Meanwhile, local news channels were beginning to catch wind of the inconsistencies. Reporters camped outside the sheriff's office. Hashtags spread online. Hashtag Rancho Monte Carlo. Hashtag Quintana Case. What had once looked like a family tragedy was starting to resemble a criminal cover-up. The sheriff's department, under mounting pressure, issued a brief statement. "We are actively pursuing all angles in the ongoing investigation. No conclusions have been made." But behind the official words, they were sitting on evidence that pointed toward something darker. Then came the most damning piece yet. A neighbor, a retired oil contractor named Henry Lowe, came forward with dashcam footage. It showed a dark SUV leaving the Quintana property at 4:30 a.m., just minutes before deputies were called. The vehicle wasn't registered to the family. Investigators traced the plate to a company tied to one of Quintana's offshore entities. The driver, whose face wasn't visible, appeared to be carrying something heavy, possibly a bag or a case, toward the back of the vehicle. The footage ended abruptly as the SUV sped off down the unlit county road. For detectives, it was the confirmation they'd feared. Quintana wasn't acting alone that night. The timeline no longer made sense. If his wife had truly tried to harm their children, how did a company vehicle connected to Quintana's shell accounts end up at the mansion before dawn? And who had given the order, "Do it before sunrise"? As suspicions deepened, a new theory began to form among investigators, one that could rewrite the case entirely. What if the wife had discovered evidence of Quintana's illegal dealings and threatened to expose him? What if the attempted drowning wasn't her doing at all? but his plan to make her look unstable and erase the threat she posed. It was a theory no one wanted to voice publicly, not yet. But in private meetings, the phrase staged incident began appearing in internal reports. Detective Hines, now leading the investigative task force, reviewed all the findings late one night in her office. The pond photos, the text messages, the audio clip, the SUV footage. Everything pointed toward one conclusion, and yet there was still no body in custody. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the evidence board covered in string and photos. Then her phone buzzed, a restricted number. When she answered, a low male voice said only one thing before the line went dead. "You're looking in the wrong direction, detective. Check the cameras again." She froze, because she knew the only cameras that hadn't been reviewed were the ones from inside the mansion's private basement. By early October, Liberty County had gone quiet, too quiet. The flashing lights that once cut across the fog around Rancho Monte Carlo had faded. But in their place came a deeper, heavier silence, the kind that follows when a story refuses to die. Investigators packed up their mobile units. The pond behind the mansion was calm again, reflecting only gray skies and unanswered questions. Sheriff's deputies said the scene was cleared, but the air still hummed with something unsettled. For the people of Liberty County, nothing felt over. Officially, Domingo Quintana had been arrested on a charge unrelated to the near-drowning, animal cruelty, after deputies found an emaciated cat during the search. It sounded small compared to the chaos that morning, but it was the only charge prosecutors could file while they dug deeper. Unofficially, everyone sensed there was more beneath the surface. Reporters pressed for details. The Liberty County Sheriff's Office released a cautious update. No arrests related to the pond incident, and the investigation was ongoing. Then came another twist. A Liberty Police lieutenant suspended after allegedly gaining unauthorized access to Quintana in custody. The Texas Rangers stepped in. Internal Affairs launched a separate review. Why would an officer risk his career to speak to a man whose case wasn't even public yet? And then nothing. Weeks passed. The mother and 3 children, rescued that morning, were moved under the care of Child Protective Services. Their names remained sealed, their whereabouts undisclosed. Officials said only that the children were safe. Safe, but silent. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and comfort, stood deserted. Neighbors said the gates stayed closed, and the driveway, where emergency vehicles once crowded, grew wild with weeds. Liberty County property records still list the same owner. No foreclosure, no sale, no sign of anyone stepping forward. From the outside, it looks untouched. But those who pass by say they sometimes see movement. A light flickering upstairs, a curtain shifting just before dawn. Whether it's the wind or memory, no one knows. No one goes close enough to check. Investigators confirmed that several security cameras on the property had been disabled that morning. One hard drive was recovered, but the portion of footage covering the critical minutes around sunrise, the moment the family was believed to be near the pond, was corrupted. Experts are still trying to recover it. That missing footage has become the centerpiece of the mystery. If the mother truly acted alone, as the father claimed, what explains the lost video files? If Domingo Quintana saved his family, why are there gaps in his timeline? And if no crime was committed, why are so many departments, from local deputies to the Texas Rangers, still involved months later? Every answer seems to raise another question. A neighbor, interviewed by local news, said something that still echoes across Liberty County. That house looks beautiful from the outside, but it's got shadows in every window. For now, those shadows hold the story hostage. Authorities say the investigation is active but delicate. They're waiting on forensic results, digital and psychological evaluations, interviews, and reports that could take months. Until then, the official line remains: no charges, no closure. Yet, the human side of this story refuses to rest. What pushes a family to the brink? What happens behind walls when wealth isolates instead of protects? And can a single morning unravel years of carefully kept appearances? Back at Rancho Monte Carlo, the pond is still. A few toys, small, faded, lie half buried in the mud near the bank. The wind carries no answers, only whispers from those who still drive past to see for themselves. Some say you can feel it, that sense of something unfinished, like a book left open in the rain. Others think the real story will surface only when someone finally speaks, when someone decides to trade silence for truth. But until that day, Liberty County waits. Because in Texas, some stories don't end with an arrest. They end with a question mark. And this one, the Quintana mystery, still echoes through the quiet roads of Liberty County, where every dawn feels like a secret waiting to surface. Maybe the truth really did drown that morning. Maybe it's still trapped beneath the stillness of Liberty County, waiting for the right voice to bring it back to the surface. What we do know is this: every secret leaves a trace, and sometimes, even the ones we bury the deepest, eventually find their way back into the light. If the story left you questioning, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next case might just be one that was never meant to be solved. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.